First, we have head of our program, Anttoni KUUSELA of Finland.
Thank you. So apologies, my computer doesn't want to work and I can't sort of put the slides on also. So we have to do it this way.
No, just move it up a little and there you go. Where? Here. Yes. That's this, right? Yeah, is that it?
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
It is, but the effect is this. Jim, the effect is this. My screen. That's the screen of there. So.
You have to switch your sharing on your desktop as opposed to sharing the PowerPoint. You go back to sharing, you can switch them if you like.
No. Share and then share again. Share.
PowerPoint?
Share desktop.
Do I share the PowerPoint or that's
Share desktop.
PowerPoint.
Computer screen, right?
the entire screen? Which one? Oh, so that's the one I'm trying to share.
Yeah.
Yep.
Still not working.
Sorry, Anthony, what about the other option? That one, what did we say, Alista or something like that?
Yeah, from the beginning. Yeah. Yeah, no problem. Right. So, this is a sort of a work in process, I think. So the title is Tentatively to Quest for the Self-Modernity and its Zen. I'm looking at Nishitani's essay and also into his other works and borrowing heavily from Hartmut Rosa's social book, Social Acceleration, in which there's this interesting depiction of modernity, which I think coincides interestingly with the Zen quest for the self, or what Nishitani calls the GQ map. And to be sure, as all of you are aware, Nishitani is critical of modernity and speaks of modernity quite a lot in his early writings. And I'm not going to go into those, and this is sort of like a general look into modernity in general and Nishitani's essay. That's the topic of this workshop. And some random remarks he does here and there in his writings. So here's the contents for today. So I'll first go through Rosa's idea of the approach to finding the self in modernity, and then Nishitani's, which you, of course, are by now quite well aware of, but just going to go through it in general and quickly. And then I'm going to try to get at the idea of Zen, the true spirit of modernity, that in Zen, the true spirit of modernity can perhaps be found in one sense. So please bear with me with this. So according to Rosa, the fundamental characteristic of modernity is the process of individualization that stands in contrast to pre-modern identity determining factors of religion and tradition. And these external forces bound the individual into a social class, region, occupation, religion, etc. They were born into. So there weren't any or much social movement around, or nor could one like change classes, or oftentimes one did not travel very far. These are, to be sure, like very general or generalizations. So these are not meant to be like in-depth sociological analysis of the condition, although Rosa does that, but I'm staying on the general level here. But in modernity, the religion and tradition that previously determined the identity of an individual no longer have the strength to do so. And the individualization process of modern thus bears the characteristic of being a reflexive inward turn. And modern selves, the fact of who one is, cannot in modernity be determined from the outside, as they were in pre-modern times by religion and tradition. So there's according to Rosa, a big break in between pre-modern and modern selfhood or identity, from external determination to internal determination by the individual. In modern, can by the outside institution in pre-modern. So, but the self that is formed through this individualization process is, in a sense, close to the pre-modern self, of having this stability that the identity had in pre-modern times, because religion and tradition gave sort of like strong grounds on which the selfhood of the individual was built on. And this yearn for stability and long-term duration of the individual self is sort of retained in modernity, in which the project of self-determination is again aimed for a long-term duration. And while that identity is not predetermined, and must be determined by the individuals themselves. I don't know what affixed to what unchanging, but yeah, unchanging institution, yes. And it's a one-time process, basically, sorry, a one-time process of choosing the sort of the occupation where one lives. Of course, one can move around a bit, but you know, sort of a semi-permanent decision. And then one's family, political views, and obvious you are decided in a one-time event and then locked into place, but they are to give some to not sort of like stay in to too strict a view on these elements. There can be seen a sort of like further refination through the actions the individual does within the spheres of chosen identity constituting elements. So one's religious beliefs can be a bit determined in further detail by actions in the within the sphere of that religion, and so yeah. So that's the basic idea of modern self-determining process and individualization, to which I'll return a bit later in somewhat different light. But now moving on to the standpoint of the standpoint self towards the self. Difficult. But yeah, based on the discussions today already, we have a somewhat good idea on what Nishitani says the self to be in the standpoint of Zen. So first, it's something that needs to be clarified through an inquiry into the self. And this is in contrast to the normal way of seeing that it's sort of objectively and something we are conscious of. And it's, in other words, self-consciousness, so to speak. And further, the self is shut within itself in separation from other beings. It's a so-called pathological concentration of the self. And at this point, this comes in connection with the in what in previous presentations was pointed out about the youth cultures which Nishitani targets and which he says are these pathological concentrations of the cell. So I'm sort of in agreement with Steve that we can sort of update them. But the underlying point is that they are this pathological concentration, and the problem is not the huge seeking dancing places or whatever, or the beatniks, but the concentration that is in separation from other beings. And Nishitani is quite clear that the inquiry into the matter of self, the Kume is not done for the sake of solving external problems. As pointed out, it's not a problem of the self in polis, as in Socrates, or a religious certainty, as in Augustine, nor is it a problem of intellectual doubting, as in Descartes. Which is interestingly quite, as you all know, Nishitani calls Descartes the father of modern philosophy. And as I stated, that the sort of like the quest for modern selfhood is a quest for stability. In other words, a certainty. So there's an interesting like a parallel between the modern philosophy starting from Descartes and the modern like cultural individualization process of finding the stability and certainty in otherwise mobile and ever-changing world. So Nishitani calls the self itself becoming a problem ruled out, in which questions about the fundamental existence of the self, who am I and where am I going, appear. And these doubts, external answers and ones given by authorities do not suffice, and the answer must come from within the self itself. And the problem can, moreover, cannot be solved intellectually. So that's the sort of like I think the core of what Nishitani tries to say at this point. So can we find a true spirit of modernity in Zen? As seen for both Zen and modernity, their essence lies in finding out what the self is, quote, clarifying its matter. Of course, arguably that project within the project of modernity quest of finding out what the self is only came sort of like halfway away from its point of departure of pre-modernity. And that indeed modern quest appears as sort of negation of the previous way to understand the self. So it's a break from pre-modern way of understanding the self and determining the self, but it's sort of like tries still to cling on to the certainty of having the enduring and long-term a self of long-term duration. So, and that certainty is latched on to the institutions that sort of do not change an organization like religion and politics and the family and so on. So it's not really individualization. It's not on a sort of like a fundamental dimension that Nishitani speaks about in his essay. It's not like a true conversion, but rather a transition to a new, or it's in continuity with the pre-modern identity, not a true transition to a new kind of self-determination. And the difference lies there that in modernity, the role of the individual is more autonomous than in the latter. than in pre-modernity, even though it's not true autonomy, but still dependent on external institutions. So the promise of modernity is actually autonomy and self-determination of the self instead of material and social compulsion, which were done by the by traditions and religion. Yeah, so that's the total promise of modernity, which sort of arises from the process of acceleration, which Rosa thinks is threefold. It's the acceleration of the pace of life, the rate of social change, and of the technical goal-oriented processes. These often in sociology of time, these all are, well, they are treated together, but one or the other of these three is seen as more important than the other ones. So not often so sometimes it's the pace of life that's emphasized, or the rate of social change, or the technical acceleration. But Rosa treats them as a sort of like an interchangeable sort of like a circle, which feeds back into the loop of acceleration and produces more acceleration. And in that sense, I would like again to tie back to the previous discussion about the whether culture sort of like produces economic growth and stuff like that, or economy produces culture, but it's maybe more like dynamic in its nature based on Rosa's idea. Yeah, yet acceleration has turned on the project it was supposed to bring about, that it's modernity and the autonomous self-determination nature of the individual. And results actually in the need to give up both self-determination and autonomy for the sake of stability, which then is not actually achieved, but is again a sacrifice for the sake of further acceleration. So there's this sort of like a self-contradictory process. Interestingly, of course, when speaking about modernity, there's the problem of when modernity starts, which what is pre-modern, what is modern, and then what's post or late modern. Rosa, I think, puts the beginning of modernity sometimes in the Renaissance, but not like in the before Industrial Revolution, because it's Industrial Revolution is more like a further accelerating process, not at the start of the modernity per se. But yeah, but moving to the towards contemporary matters, that is late modernity. So Rosa does speak occasionally about post-modernity, but I think I also use late modernity. He uses these quite interchangeably. So late modernity is, I think, better word, because we are in the same process of acceleration and same process of like form of culture and society and so on. So there is not really the break that post-modernity would suggest. So interestingly, in late modernity, project individualizations transform from stability to more open, experimental, and fragmentary self-projects. In this case, individualization comes to mean an increase in the possibilities and possible choices and contingencies of one's identity, which can be combined more freely, while the elements of one's identity are more easily revised. So they are not locked into place, like I said, traditionally were in the modern individualization process, like we choose pieces of identity which then are locked into place and which we then sort of refine further in a ongoing lifetime process. But instead, there are more, in late modern, they can be given up and new ones taken up more easily. Yeah, so in thinking, yeah, and yes, so interestingly, late modern identities are characterized above all else by consistently transitory forms of selfhood. Rosa speaks about the problem of not being able to sort of like characterize the self, the forms of selfhood in a stable or unified manner, and find like the unchanging core of selfhood, which I found was quite interesting in the sense that if we take for granted the need for stability and unchangeability, then these late modern identities, which are consistently transitory, it's a problem. But if we take sort of like an Zen Buddhist, sort of like an open-ended, like was pointed out, that Nishitani doesn't give a definitive answer to what is self, but leaves it open. So it's something that needs to be clarified again, sort of. So it's from such a perspective, this idea of late modern identity is not that problematic. Moreover, Rosa speaks also about like the how in these late modern identities they become sort of predicateless. So they don't have a predicate that's defining them, which I found quite interesting coming from a Kyoto school perspective. Also, I'm not sure why he uses predicate, because I think what he means is more in line with say sort of like seeing the selfhood as sort of like a substantive, not as predicate, like Nishida says in his the logic of puzzle. So there are some interesting elements hidden within there. Then tying again to Nishitani's thought, there's speaking of acceleration too, again, when the pace of life accelerates, it sort of like promises that one can exhaust the possibilities one has in life before death, and that the Rosa actually says that the fear of death and the promise of salvation is still in modernity at the sort of like a root of the drive for exhausting the possibilities of life. So and finding success, it draws from the sort of like the what's it? I blanked out. The Christian ethos at the roots of capitalism. The correct word escapes me now, but I'm sure you know what I mean. And Rosa further speaks about the fact that even though the promise of salvation and fear of damnation was taken out of its religious context, like I've said, that the religion has not the same power as to determine the individual's identity as it had before, but the same fear sort of like stays in there. has the same mechanism that time is running out. I I haven't done enough or all that I wanted or stuff like that. And so the same logic of trying to do as much as one can to sort of like escape damnation or reach some sort of salvation is still there, even though it's removed from the religious context. Yeah. So in a sense, this increasing acceleration results in a renewed awareness of the limitedness of time, that there is no time, even though we have various new technological innovations which give us more time. Like in modernity, of course, there becomes the we don't no longer have to walk. We can drive a car, take a car or a train or whatever, and thus we don't have to spend so much time journeying somewhere. Or at home, we can do the dishes by putting them in the dishwasher, and we don't have to spend time on that. Same with the laundry. But still, while time is saved in this context, the possibilities are increasing at the same in a increasing pace. So the time spent is saved in these menial tasks or traveling spent in other contexts. Then so the the equivalent becomes that there's no time actually. And this awareness of there not being time engenders actually it's almost Rosa speaks not as slippery slope, but slipping slopes that are continuously slopes that are fields of being that are continuously like slipping away, and in which the individual has to constantly keep up with the slippery slope and to sort of like keep up with the demands of the time or keep up with time, so to speak. So in that sense, time is, and yeah, here is the correct place where the, yeah, time is existentially scarce, even though the religious fear of damnation or death is not there anymore. And of course, this can be expressed, I think, in Nishitani and like jargon or special words like slipping slopes, the sort of like existence being rooted in nihility. And I think the fear of time running out is sort of like the individual catching, not being able to run away from the basic nihility at the root of one's existence. There's a possible connection there in Rosa's thought and in Nishitani's thought. Yeah, so for a late modern person, in a sense, there is no time and it's already up. There's nothing anymore to do, and thus, in a sense, death is already at hand. What I mean is that the inward turn of modernity that was supposed to make an individual a self as one personally wanted to make it, it in fact alienated human beings from one another. Nor did it really help clarify the self, but rather made it murkier with the multiplication of the possibilities of what the self is. And these possibilities are, again, just external factors, not something that come from within the self itself. So while there's the inward turn in modernity, trying to clarify the self, rather than clarify the self was crystallized into the facets of its identity constituting factors, so like to argue. So it was not the sort of like true self that was clarified, or to Nishitani's idea that where Descartes' doubt stops, Zen's doubt begins. So in a sense, the modern doubt or quest for certainty stopped at the point where the true self might have been found. Yes. So yeah, these are the basic ideas of Nishitani's that if the self is truly clarified, the matter of self opens the non-self being of emptiness. It is, in other words, direct experience of the self in which there is no need to speculate about oneself. I as the self just am. Yeah. But what is interesting in this context, I think, is Nishitani's contention is in his lectures in volume 16 that alienation is actually alienation from other human beings. And yeah, but Nishitani does bring the clarification of the matter of self into that context. So when a person is alienated from other persons, the self cannot become herself through those relationships. So he says that explicitly there. So I think there's even though in there Nishitani sort of emphasizes the self, the importance of the self. I think that in this idea of alienation, there's this strong element of interhuman relationships, which I think for Nishitani in that context were important. Yes. And this alienation might possibly be a result of the inward turn, the individuals shutting within themselves and separating from the other human beings and not connecting with those other beings. Yeah. So just for concluding remarks quickly. So first, the identity of the modern individual self is based on certainty, and such certainty was thought to be attainable through an inward turn away from external determining factors. Zen subscribes to a similar modus operandi of finding the answer to the problem of the self within the self itself. Identity of the self is not sustainable over long periods of time in late modernity. This is the situation. And indeed, a sort of impermanence has crept into self-formation of identity in late modernity in the form of situational identity, thus in a way approaching Zen understanding of self. So Rosa speaks of situational identity, which changes according to the different situation the self points on is, and it's not strongly locked into place like it was in modernity. Yeah, and the answers that the modern process of individualization gave to the problem of the self were not truly internal but external, becoming from the outside in sense and resulting in a pathological construct of self, not the self in a true self. Looking at the theory of modernity Rosa presents, it seems evident that the self was indeed not clarified truly, and to do that, another way must be taken, as was evident in the previous discussions. We are now in a situation where we are beset by various crises and dangers, and these have been brought about through the modern view of seeing things and doing things, and sort of like doing more of the same and not really altering our course. So perhaps Zen one might be a way to truly go forward into a different direction. Yeah. So as I said, I sort of like used different places of Nishitani's works, volumes, sources, some there, and part of Rosa's book, Sociological Learning in Pure Modern. So thank you for your attention.
I have a question. You used the term modernity.
Yes.
Do you think modernity is a universal phenomena, or there are several modernities?
So yeah, I think it can be and should be differentiated between, like, of course, between Western modernity or something else, but of course now in the late modern phase, I think it's more uniform. Yeah, that's the short answer. Yeah.
So, for example, people in Japan, they live in late modernity as the same as in Finland or USA or in Italy.
Yeah, of course there are of course there are differentiations between places and countries, but in some sort of like general overarching level, it contains the same elements, I think. Yeah, not to be too heavy-handed, but I think it's becoming more uniform. Yeah.
And I have another question. So, if it is the case, why? And you suggested that Zen has a lot of things in common with its existential situation of individuals, or modern individuals, as you said. Why Zen in Japan is not so popular?
That's a good question. Yeah. You hit me into the weak spot, I think. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's too. No, but isn't I think it's not popular in anywhere else either, in the true sense. Like the Zen that is done, for example, in the United States, it's often influenced by psychology and different traditions of that. So, and emphasizing different parts of it and so on and so forth. So maybe it's not popular anywhere, and but maybe the reason for that is that it's quite too rigorous to attend to. You sort of, like it was pointed out, that you have to clarify the matter for yourself. Everyone has to do that, and it's quite demanding, I think. So yeah, and like Jim pointed out, that if you want to ask why you believe this or that in school, for example, you get into trouble, or if you have someone interested. If you have someone coming to a religious context with one another, if you question their beliefs or try to get them to articulate why they believe this or that, they just go away and don't come back. So I think it might actually have something to do with the sort of logic of that modern acceleration, where it stays on a sort of like a situational level and always changes, and you can always take this thing up, and if it doesn't serve you any longer, you can just put it away and take another. So you don't really have to probe deeply into the different elements of identities or things that could form identities. So maybe it's Zen demands too much, maybe. Yeah.
So thank you very much. Can I?
Yes, of course.
Well, since this morning, I was thinking about the emic and etic problem of the mind, inside and outside of the mind. So I started thinking about this after listening to Maraldo Sensei's lecture this morning, but this problem of modernity of, etic mind or etic self outside the self that is that is grounded based on the labeling of the others, right? I mean, and then you self-reflectively understand that you are you through the eyes of the others, right? Like you know, and this I wasn't really aware of this Hartmut Rosa's. So I was just looking at it briefly, but then. His logic is also very multi-layered in a way, because he's talking about the speed of and you also mentioned about situational identity, but then this emic inside the Zen kind of self-understanding, and the outside, the etic self. Rebalancing is the most important thing. And I think when you mentioned we all need Zen, I was thinking that you were mentioning that you were trying to say that we have to rebalance these imbalances of the etic and emic self. But the problem that I was thinking about from this morning after Maraldo Sensei's talk was this. So I'm thinking about the consciousness of mind, the consciousness and mind, problem of consciousness and mind. So now there's the whole discussions of going on whether AI has its own consciousness or mind developed, right? And so this is the reason why I'm thinking about etic and emic. Because you cannot really tell if you ask the AI, so ChatGPT-4, maybe it will say, or we can kind of see or perceive as if it has its own consciousness or mind, but that is also depending on how we define consciousness of mind, right? So, I mean, it's really interesting to talk about ourselves, the self that we understand, but then at the same time, how we are being perceived as a consistent self. I mean, especially when I'm looking at AI and looking through us through like a boomerang effect, putting AI as the other of human beings. So I was thinking, how could we, talk about this etic and emic self in that kind of context? I mean, I would like to ask both of you about this.
Please. Going a roundabout way about this, but yeah, I think I might have emphasized self too much, like how we understand it, but in the sense that based on my own experience, for example, it seems that what I am and what I sort of do are affected a lot by other persons. So it becomes sort of clarified through others. And interesting, Nishitani says in lectures in 16 that the self is sort of like understood in relations with others. So that's something I've come to really appreciate. So so we have been speaking about compassion also, the Zen compassion. So I think it's something that gets lost too often. So that's something to must be sort of regained. So going more towards the like an interpersonal selfhood or something like that.
Interpersonal interrelationality or interpenetration was also one thing.
That's
afternoon.
Interesting. So, well, I have an opinion about AI consciousness, which I probably will have to change for time. But emic and etic, of course, are anthropological categories,
Right.
and in philosophy of AI, they are not used that commonly, but certainly understandable. So emic would refer to what a lot of philosophers of mind would call interiority, as opposed to an outsider's point of view. So each of us, for example, could be seen as multiple selves. I am one person to myself, someone else to my wife, someone else to my students, my parents and so on and so forth. So all of these are somehow integrated into both emic and etic at the same time, or interior and exterior. So consciousness is, as I understand it, always embodied. And it's not necessarily embodied as a spirit put inside a body, but whatever immaterial consciousness might mean, it lives through the body and through what we isolate as the brain. So we talk about artificial brains and artificial intelligence. How artificial intelligence is embodied is a primary question. Certainly human beings that create AI programs could do so that an AI program could, and if you ask it, are you conscious? It could answer, well, sure. I mean, it could answer no. It could answer however we program it to answer, but it's still the source, the source of whatever it does and says is human programming. Of course, now AI machines can, to a certain extent, program themselves. They can easily pass the Turing test, which is a disembodied test after all. So for me, the biggest factor is this, not only the sense in which mind and consciousness is embodied, but the sense in which it is active in the world and moves around and how people interact with one another. And of course, this is at the basis of the questions of ethics and of compassion. That is a dimension of artificial intelligence that is not yet manifest at all. Understanding intelligence through actions, through interacting, and it's.
Yeah, Maraldo said, so a few years ago, that was also my standpoint, but I mean, during my stay in Europe, I was discussing with this professor from Cambridge University working on soft robotics. And he has already embedded, connected AI with soft robotics, which means that it has own body that has central inputs into the AI.
Yes.
That is getting problematic for me.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, like 2-3 years ago, I mean, we could only it was segregated. The body and AI was totally segregated.
Yeah.
We never thought about the combination of the two.
Yeah.
But now robotics has its own AI and compassion. The care robots are already there. I mean, so
if it's compassion.
Yeah.
You think so?
Yeah, the anthropologist in Australia who is working with the elderly people's home, she's already introducing such robots. And that kind of robots are already, interacting with compassion with people with dementia. Yeah, so it's a different.
Yes, I understand that.
It's getting a different. So that's why I'm like. Yeah. Thinking about this, Aomori Shozo, my favorite Tokyo School philosopher, he used to talk about whether robot has its own compassion or kokoro, right? And then he was saying he was also, I claimed that it's also about the programming behind the scene. If we see robots acting as if it is compassionate, then it is about us who have projected that action.
Right.
But then now AI has its own intentionality to learn through the actions and to be compassionate with others, right?
How do we know it has its own intentionality?
Well, it's also programmed to have intentions towards the elderly people to keep on answering the same questions or keep on saying, am I making sense? Yeah. So that looks as if seen from the third person perspective, it seems as if it has a compassion. And then the elderly people, if you take the questionnaires, it was eye-opening because that was a sociologist that I was talking with in Uvascular University, by the way. She was saying that based on the questionnaire, every elderly, most 80% of the elderly people says that it is easier for them to, to talk with robots rather than to humans.
Yeah.
And that was very flabbergasting thing for me. And that's why I'm asking about what is the consciousness and what is the mind and self in that sense. It's totally different from the ones that we were talking about this time, but it's more like a pride.
Right.
Yeah.
It remains a big question for me too. But there's one other thing that I would like us to recognize, and that is the consciousness of, and the self-consciousness of non-human animals, which I think is a more pressing issue ecologically
Right.
than the question of the artificial intelligence.
Right.
So that's the sort of research I'm pursuing now. Although I've had to teach about AI consciousness. Another thing that you mentioned, we should remember that robots don't have to be made essentially to look like human beings.
No.
So perhaps we make them that way so we can relate to them more easily, but they don't have to look like that at all.
No. The one that, the Australians are using is like the hug robot. So it doesn't really look at humans, but it's like, it has a body shape, of course, but then you can keep on hugging on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still don't think that these things have self-awareness, but
Not yet. Not
I wouldn't know how to prove that they did or didn't. So the Turing test doesn't work as a test.
Yeah. Well, side note, one action, Professor Ikegami at the University of Tokyo, who is working on robotics also. He has ChatGPT-4 is now can be attached to the cameras. And the camera is always watching, what the students are doing. And every week, Ikegami Sensei comes into the lab room because it's so dirty with, it's a boys' club, basically. So, he orders the grad students to clear things, osoji shinasai. And then, a few months later, one semester, Ikegami Sensei was telling me that the robot but the ChatGPT-4 with just the two cameras, you need to have two cameras just to know the 3D, right? The dimensions, right? The depths of the room and so forth, right? So it has two cameras attached to ChatGPT-4. And then it started saying, before Ikegami Sensei comes into the room, it gives commands to the students that it's time for you to clean the room. And he was saying that was really scary for him because he thought that it might be, gaining consciousness, and it depends on what and how you define consciousness.
We could imagine, could we imagine a robot joining us in our discussions today? That would.
Okay, thank you very much.